Okay, let's just jump right in. Look, almost every single one of us gets back pain at some point. But for millions of people, it's this chronic, life-altering problem. So today, we're going to dig into a really fascinating study that's hunting for the reasons why, not in our posture or our mattress, but deep, deep inside our cells.
And that's the big question, right? Could this thing that affects so many of us actually be written into our genetic code? The answer could totally change how we treat one of the most common health problems on the entire planet. But to really get why this research is so important, we have to zoom out for a second and look at the bigger picture.
So 71%. What's that about? Well, get this. That's the slice of all deaths on the entire planet caused by what are called non-communicable diseases, or NCDs. We're talking about things like heart disease, diabetes, and, yep, chronic pain. They are, without a doubt, the single biggest health challenge we face today.
But here's where the story gets really interesting. It's where this is all happening. A truly staggering 80% of those deaths are in low and middle-income countries. So this isn't just about health, you see. It's about a massive global inequality. And that is the exact problem that the scientists in our source material wanted to start chipping away at.
Okay, so that brings us to our first big piece of the puzzle here, the global health puzzle. We're about to see why something as incredibly common as back pain is still, in many ways, a complete scientific mystery for huge parts of the world. Now, to really get this, we've got to talk about the specific condition these scientists are zoning in on. It's called intervertebral disc degeneration, or IVDD for short. Just think of the discs in your spine as these perfect little jelly-filled shock absorbers. Well, IVDD is basically what happens when those shock absorbers start to get old, wear out, and break down. And it is a major, major cause of chronic lower back pain. And this quote from the study, man, it just hits the nail on the head. For decades, most genetic research has focused on people of European descent. That means we've been basically ignoring the most genetically diverse populations on Earth, the very places where we could potentially find the most answers.
So if you're a genetic detective on this case, where to even begin to look for clues? Well, that leads us right to our main suspects, the mitochondria. You probably remember hearing this term in high school biology, right? The powerhouses of the cell. And yeah, that's pretty much spot on. They are the tiny engines inside our cells that turn our food and the oxygen we breathe into the raw energy that runs, well, everything. If your mitochondria aren't working right, your cells just don't have the juice to do their jobs. And this is how a tiny problem can snowball into a huge one. It's like a chain reaction. It all starts with one tiny little error, a mutation in the mitochondria's own unique DNA. That mutation makes the mitochondria less efficient, so they produce less energy. This, in turn, creates a kind of damaging exhaust called oxidative stress. And it turns out the cells in your spinal discs are really sensitive to that stress, and they start to break down. It's actually kind of mind-blowing. One tiny genetic typo can kick off a chain of events that leads to a major physical condition. All right, so we've got the theory down, but how do you actually prove it? That's what brings us to the South African study itself. The researchers needed to find some real-world evidence, and they specifically chose to look in a population that's been overlooked for way too long. So here's the setup. They basically put two groups side by side. First, you have the cases, 60 people who were diagnosed with IVDD, mostly over the age of 50. Then you have the controls, 102 people with no back pain, and they were mostly younger. The mission? Super simple. Comb through their DNA and see what's different. And getting the DNA was really easy. Just a simple cheek swab, nothing invasive. Now, it is important to note that most of the people in the study were from the Cape Admixed and Caucasian population groups. And that wasn't by some grand design, it was just a practical thing based on which pain clinics they were able to collect samples from. And that detail is going to be pretty important later. Okay, so the stage is set, right? Samples are in, the lab's humming with activity, and everyone's holding their breath, waiting for that aha moment. And what the researchers found was, well, it wasn't exactly what they were expecting. This. After all that work, the initial results came back showing no statistically significant link, not a single one. It looked, for all intents and purposes, like a total dead end. You can just imagine the frustration. But science is rarely that clean, you know? Because while there wasn't one single smoking gun mutation that they could point to, when they dug a little deeper into the data, they found something else, something incredibly promising.
they found 3 crucial clues. And this, right here, is where the real story begins. For these 3 specific mutations, the pattern is just impossible to ignore. Look at that first one. It showed up in almost double the percentage of people with back pain versus those without. And you see the same trend for the other 2. They were all consistently and noticeably more common in the group with IVD. This wasn't a dead end at all. It was more like a treasure map, pointing them exactly where to dig next.
So, what's the big deal? How can a study that says no significant results actually be a giant leap forward? Well, that brings us to our final section and what this all means for the future of medicine.
I mean, the researchers basically spell it out for us. This was a relatively small, pilot-sized study. And when you're working with a small group, it's really hard to get a result that's considered statistically airtight. But the trend they saw was so strong, they believed that if they just had a bigger group of people, these clues would very likely have become official, significant findings. So this wasn't a failure, it was a proof of concept.
So let's boil this all down. What are the big things you should take away from this? First off, and this is huge, genetics is not a one-size-fits-all deal. What we find in a European population might not apply to a South African one. Second, this study is a landmark. It's a crucial first step, providing brand new genetic data where there was none before. And finally, this is the kind of work that lays the foundation for personalized medicine, where we can start to develop treatments that are tailored not just to a disease, but to you as an individual.
And that brings us right back to where we started, but with a whole new perspective. We asked if back pain is written in our DNA. And what this research is suggesting is that the answer might just be yes. And the clues have been hiding in those tiny powerhouses inside our cells all along. There's still a long road ahead for sure, but this study has given us a vital, exciting new map to follow.